present House Bill 52. And to give you a little bit more story on this bill, it's actually a mix of both omnibus, the 1438. So it took, this bill is actually a combination of House Bill 1438 and Senate Bill 558. It combined both of those bills together, both of them ping pong between the chambers, and they never got across. And yeah, Operation Paperclip did happen. We were able to paperclip it, but couldn't get across the finish line in time. So this has 6 sections. Some of it's hard-hitting, exciting legislation. First one makes the email instead of physical mail the required notification method for legislative council, so legislators for call board elections for GDOT. Section 2 replaces requests for proposals with requests for proposal revisions as one of the authorized negotiating activities. Section 3 provides clarifying language on alternative contracting methods. Specifically, it clarifies the statute's original intent to apply the restrictions on contract value and frequency to the CMGC, which is Construction Manager General Contractor, aka alternative contracting method. Section 4 changes modular sectional housing to be transported from its current 80-foot length to 84 feet. And to make something very clear, this does not in any way affect any weight. So it's about 400 pounds of linear foot, so we're actually talking about 1,600 pounds here. Section 5 grants further ability of an appropriate county medical examiner to delegate their authority to qualified medical personnel in the field at the site of the accident. The idea is this is limited access roadways. So if for whatever reason the coroner couldn't get there, or the authorized medical examiner can't get there, they can delegate to someone who's qualified at the site. And Section 6 is to ensure there's no abuse of the Open Records Acts to get personal information about a driver's license, or about a driver's location, history, or any other personal information through the state, either directly or indirectly through vendors' data. And that's the quick rundown of the bill. More than happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative. Who's on number 4? Is that Senator McLaurin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To my esteemed former seatmate, it's good to see you, and I congratulate you on the gods favoring you enough to have a bill pass out of the House this early in session. I've got a very grave concern about the first section about notice for GDOT board. Traditionally, House Democrats like to complain that failure to give notice in the proper fashion is a wide-scale conspiracy theory involving the majority party and legislative council, and the requirement for written notice makes it easier for House Democrats to allege those conspiracy theories. I'm a little concerned that with an email notice, it would take away the ability for House Democrats to credibly allege that. Do you have any comments on that?
I don't like paper mail. This catches us up to 1995, and I'm very excited for this change. I have no comment to the regards of my friends across the aisle.
Yeah, I reluctantly admit that this is good government. So I guess, taking away one opportunity for us to make noise is something I can live with. But thanks for bringing the bill, and good to see you.
Senator McLaurin, it's nice to see you too.
Senator.
To my former colleague, the representative, I do want to support this bill today, but I do have a question in support of my colleague from Dade County. Will this bill help us reduce government spending and postage? And if it will, do you know approximately how much we could save?
I didn't figure out how much we would save in postage, no. I imagine it's an astronomical sum of a couple dollars. So, but great question. Obviously miss you over in the House as well. Thank you.
Senator again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that we're also extending the length on the modular or mobile home, as it may be. And one of the things that I'd ask is, who can I get to test drive one through the the city of Carnesville, Georgia, where I was county manager. I want to see somebody do that. Said but whenever you're ready, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to pass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This bill has such a dramatic impact on the state of the free world. There are a few more questions. I believe the next one is from Chairman Anavitarte.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be very brief. I noticed there's senators in the room who used to be on your side of the building asking you questions. So when the House version of this bill and the Senate version came together, which do you believe was the better version? The House version or the Senate version?
Wow.
It really could depend on your
you're
outcome
not good.
today, how you answer this question.
Well, being that different sections were pulled out of different bills, so specifically, it was Section 5 was out of Senate Bill 558. Fantastic language in the Senate bill. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 were all pulled out of the House bill. Again, fantastic language. It's hard to compare apples to oranges, so let's just say they're all great.
Mr. Chairman,
No, all of them are great. They're all great.
I may have to make a motion to table this bill.
The ever so prompt Leader Gooch.
All right. The part about Section 3, I think it's a CMCG stuff. I'm highly supportive of this concept, but we've talked about this previously. We've talked about it in closed door with Green Door in the budget. This project in Savannah to elevate the bridge is strictly, specifically for the Port of Savannah. And it could be as much as $200 million, I understand. So, and there's some other big projects around the state for certain economic development projects. I just want to continue to have this conversation that we should not be taking big lumps of money out of the GDOT project list and programs that have been worked on for years and fast forward those at the expense of all the other projects around the state and all of our respective districts. I mean, I support the raising of the bridge. I support the Rivian transportation improvements, the Hyundai transportation improvements, but we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. We should, as a legislative body, if these projects are important, we should allocate them through the general fund and through the budgeting process and not taking it from GDOT's limited bucket of funds. Does that make sense? So
I think that's a fair
not
statement.
particularly going to impact this bill today. I'm going to vote for it. But I just want to, every opportunity we get, all of us need to start talking about this because this is important that we keep our funding intact so we can get our projects moving in our districts too. Everybody in this room has a district with needs for GDOT funding. And if we take $300 or $400 million of that money out of the STIP, then it's just going to push our projects back indefinitely. So just wanted to make that publicly allowed today and continue to talk about it. We're going to keep beating that drum until we get a remedy for it. So thank you.
It's a great point, Mr. Leader. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Senator Lucas.
I totally agree with Senator Gooch. Looking at all of the Kia plants, Rivian and all of them, I did not know that it came out of GDOT's money. We didn't allocate the money for those projects. So you're talking about $700-900 million coming out of GDOT's money just to do on and off ramps. If they're good enough, then we need to find a way to finance them rather than pulling out DOT's back.
Sounds like we have a caucus forming here. Thank you, Senator. Any other questions, Representative? We do have Neil Herring here to speak in favor. Mr. Herring, if you want to step forward.
He's going to try to kill the bill, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, I ordinarily oppose DOT bills as a matter of course. I represent the Georgia chapter of the Sierra Club. We hate pavement. But I've supported this bill before the House committee, and I want to renew my support before this committee, particularly calling your attention to Section 6. Senator Gooch has been very helpful to us, the Sierra Club's program with the governor, electrifying transportation in Georgia. And we believe that future funding for transportation improvements is going to have to be redesigned. And it's probably going to rely on some sort of computerized recording of miles traveled and where they're located. And adding this information, personally identifiable, vehicle information and personally identifiable information to the GORA exception is a very important step that y'all are taking, because it'll increase public confidence in the security of their personal information. They won't be hounded by commercial or criminal users of that information. So we support this bill because of this provision. However, I do have some questions. In the section that Senator Gooch brought up, the alternative contracting, line 53, starting on 52, or the 53, otherwise authorized rules and regulations of the department. That's a pretty vaguely written, I told the House this, vaguely written phrase, otherwise authorized. I don't know what that means, but if I were an aggressive bureaucrat, I would read that could, if what I've got now doesn't work, I can make another rule that would fit. It seems like it's inviting that kind of behavior. I'm sure it's not, but you could read it that way. And then at the bottom, 61 and 62, the board shall be authorized to waive this requirement by a majority vote for a single project. When? One single project forever and ever? One per budget? How often? What's the frequency of this override vote? Those are just two issues that have troubled me about this last year and this year. So I'm raising them again, but I support the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Herring. Anyone have any questions for Mr. Herring?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Representative Thomas, we'll go ahead and let you add any closing comments if you'd like.
I'd like to reiterate the fact that this bill has been vetted multiple times by both chambers, and in both instances they were right there at the finish line, the 1 yard line, and just we ran out of time. I like to jokingly say they signed died. So I would say that I always like to incorporate everybody's opinions on things, but I think we vetted this well enough. I think this is ready to, hopefully, with the will of this committee in your chamber, get this across the finish line and get it over to the governor's desk.
Thank you. Senator, again, I recognize you for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Said I move do pass. Let's get our right LC number, LC 393590.
We have a motion from Senator Ginn, a second from Senator Dixon. I'll ask him that in a second. Yeah. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Representative. Who's going to carry this in the Senate for you?
That's probably the best question I got yet. I'm not quite sure, Senator Dolezal. I will have to.
I would volunteer as tribute if you find me worthy. If not, perhaps my vice chairman would step in and do so. I'd run a risk though he doesn't show up on time, but you never know what can happen.
I gladly accept that if you're so willing.
I would be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is Janine Miller here? I see her. Great. Senator.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to echo the sentiments of the distinguished majority leader that with the Georgia Port Authority and our record expansion, I do think that we should not monopolize the GDOT budget. And I do believe that there is going to need to be a process and a pathway, because the bridge and raising the bridge is only going to be one solution to another solution that will be forthcoming as we move to become the #1 port right here in Savannah and the state of Georgia. We're moving more TEUs than any other port. Our efficiency is better, and we're on track we're third now. We could move in the second, but we could be the best performing port. And with that is great economic benefit to the state, but at the same time, we should not monopolize the GDOT budget for our projects.
Great. Thank you for that. We are going to hold for Janine Miller, who's going to come in and give us a update on freight and logistics. Give her about 120 seconds to get here. If she's not here, we will adjourn and perhaps adjourn her future funding. We'll see. But she right on time, right on time. Hello, you can go ahead and step up. Representative Thomas is very efficient in presenting his bill, so we're going to go ahead and move on to your presentation. What I asked Ms. Miller to do, probably the only thing that you have heard about more than freight and logistics as it relates to this committee is truck weights. We're not going to talk about truck weights today. But the topic of freight and logistics is something that's been around for a number of years. Senator Gooch, I believe you were instrumental in a study committee in this regard. And Senator Mello, I think what you were just highlighting as it relates to the port is obviously something that's driving our need for a freight logistics plan. What I've asked Ms. Miller to do is essentially give us a 10-minute TED Talk on what she is going to present later on, I think in form of a more formal business plan, and allow us to ask questions, because this will be an ongoing conversation for us in this committee. Were you looking for something from us when you came in? On your,
In a hurry, the north stairs were
They
blocked
are-
by.
it's a good workout.
It is good. And I did send the PowerPoint, my assistant sent the PowerPoint just a few minutes ago. I don't know if they've
Okay, have you received it?
able to pull it up yet. But if,
Yeah, we actually probably need to present it from that computer.
okay,
Give us just a second to see what our options are here.
sure, no problem.
While she's doing that, do you want to maybe go ahead and kind of talk through high level of what it is that you guys are
Yes.
talking about in your
Yes.
department? Maybe introduce yourself. Tell us about what's on the front of your business card, the back of your business card, the new letterhead, because you keep getting appointed, it seems, to more and more positions. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee, and appreciate your service to our state, but particularly on the Transportation Committee. It truly is one of the differentiators for our state, our quality of life, our economic growth, is the road and rail network that we have that supports people moving to and through the state, but also freight. So my name is Janine Miller. I'm the GDOT Director of Planning. I'm also the Director of the State Road and Tollway Authority, the Director of the Atlanta Transit Link Authority, and the Director of the Georgia Regional Transportation Authority. All of those authorities work in the same space, so it's we're able to coordinate better than we ever have before, and it's very exciting work to be doing at this exciting time. And what I mean by that is Georgia continuing, of course, to be the #1 state for business. Amongst many metrics, that includes for logistics-enabled companies, as we call them. So part of the career path I've had, I had the fortune of working at the Department of Economic Development at the Logistics Innovation Center. I got to understand what private businesses are really looking for as they are seeking to expand or locate new facilities for all kinds of businesses, but particularly, as we call them, logistics-enabled businesses, being manufacturing and automotive, logistics and distribution, and agriculture, agribusiness, and food processing. Those industries have always been strong here in Georgia, but in this past fiscal year, we had a banner year, as they say.
Ms. Miller, will you suspend for just 1 second? Ladies and gentlemen, Chairman Brandon Beach. Thank you, Chairman, for joining us. Thank you, Ms. Miller.
So a little bit of history, not just this past year, but the year before. So that would be fiscal year 2021, and that started, as you know, in the summer of 2020, in the height of the pandemic. Georgia attracted $11 billion of private investment, and nearly 2/3 of those investments were in logistics-enabled companies. And thousands of jobs were coming here, even when the whole rest of the country and the world, in some ways, was shut down. Companies knew Georgia was the place to go to operate and operate efficiently. And then last year, fiscal year 2022, 358 companies announced expansions or new locations in Georgia, $21 billion of private investment. And $17.8 billion, or 84% of those funds, are into logistics-enabled facilities, meaning in order for them to do business, they need inbound cargo, and then they go through their manufacturing or processing or distribution work, and outbound distribution, outbound to the next link in the supply chain. So that was predominantly in manufacturing, in no small part, actually big dollar amounts there from both Rivian and Hyundai, $15.4 billion in manufacturing. And agribusiness was $1.4 billion by 48 companies. And logistics and distribution, nearly $1 billion by 34 companies. So very, very robust place to do business here in Georgia for those who require freight inbound and outbound. What we are doing, though, at Georgia DOT, and the focus of this discussion today is really about our federal freight plan. It's required by the new Infrastructure and Jobs Act. We've had a federal requirement for a freight plan for about a decade now. Georgia was one of the first states to ever have a freight plan. And then in the previous federal law, they started to require that for other states. We had some updates to that requirement this year, so we had to update our plan for the federal government. It's enabling us to spend a roughly $45 million per year on freight-specific projects. That is nowhere close to the demands, of freight demands that we have on our network. And as you may know, on all of our 18,000 miles of roads, trucks are allowed to drive. So $45 million does not go nearly far enough to invest for safety and efficiency of truck movement. But those are important. Oh, here's Keenan. Yes. But those are important dollars and important requirements that we have just completed and submitted to the federal government, and we're awaiting the review of that. We had to show over an 8-year period how much dollars we'll be having, can project we'll be getting from that federal National Highway Freight Program. In an 8-year period, about $427 million. Once again, though, that is just a sliver of the pie. Almost everywhere we're investing on Georgia DOT's roadway network is for trucks, because trucks can use every roadway. And we're going through, we're going to begin a process now to understand where else do we have those freight priorities and where we can allocate dollars to that. So this federally required plan is just for those $45 million a year. And those NHFP funds, National Highway Freight Program funds, have to be invested in federally designated freight corridors. We have 1,170 miles of priority freight corridors as designated by the federal government. They allow us as a state to add about 450 more miles, and we're evaluating how we can do that. The reason we would do that is simply to give us more flexibility where we can spend that $45 million a year. And it's really just for federal purposes. So if we added 450 miles, and 300 of those miles can be in rural areas, 150 of those miles can be in urban areas. If we added those 450 miles, it's going to increase the eligibility of our roadways by 38%. So that's an important process to go through. But once again, I'll say it does not mean that those are the only places that need investment or the only places that we will be investing. So if we've, okay, great. Predominantly, this network is our interstate system. I think you all are familiar with the importance of I-75 from Florida to Tennessee, of I-20 from Alabama to South Carolina. 95 in South Georgia, as well as 85, is a critical freight corridor for agriculture in particular. And I-16 is important for manufacturing. And I'll wait till we can get the slide up here, because I do want to show what that distribution, so to speak, of what types of freight is moving on which corridors. But some highlights of our federal plan, as required by U.S. Code in Title 49, is we have to document supply chain cargo flows in Georgia by mode of transportation. So we can't just say we have this much freight moving. We have to designate how much we believe is by truck and how much is by train. We also have to inventory commercial ports. We know the big one is the Port of Savannah, but there are others. And the Port of Savannah is a major epicenter of our freight growth that we have. As you all know, it's the fastest growing port in the country. The expansions that they're doing inside the gate is serving our customers, serving our shippers, but also is it's a strategy that the major shippers, that is the cargo owners, they're using Savannah as part of their international strategy. It's called a Four Corners strategy. I don't know if any of you work in supply chain, but the Four Corners are, on the West Coast is LA and Seattle, and on the East Coast is New York and Savannah. So whether we want them to come or not, they want to be here. They want to ship in and out of Savannah. It's helpful for their supply chain distribution, reducing their cost, reducing their risk. The Four Corner strategy is where, and Savannah is shining in that. We also have to show the impacts of e-commerce on freight infrastructure, military freight within Georgia, And we have included strategies to decrease freight impacts from extreme weather, local air pollution, flooding, stormwater, wildlife habitat loss. These are things that Georgia DOT does already. We're not reinventing anything. They're part of our federal process that we follow. We just had to highlight them as it relates to freight projects. And we also had to look at commercial parking for trucks. Truck parking has become a challenge nationwide. Don't know how many of you in your districts see trucks parked on the interstate overnight, and they are parking there not out of preference, but it is most likely because their hours of service run out. We're about 4 or 5 years now into the federal enforcement of hours of service by an electronic logging device, and we have had many conversations with the trucking industry. The main one being OOIDA. I don't know if any of you have heard of OOIDA, but it's the Owner-Operator Independent Driver Association. So about 90% of trucking companies are independent operators, and they are the ones who are suffering the most through this lack of truck parking. To me, it is beyond unfortunate that the people, men and women, who carry our freight, 70 to 80% of our cargo moves by truck, that they have nowhere else to sleep at night than on the side of the road. So truck parking is critical for our next work here.
Senator, what's your number there?
11. You are over Greta. Have y'all looked at any of the Greta parking rides that may not be being used adequately, of converting those to truck parking?
We have
Would
not.
that be profitable for you to do that, or do you have to go through the feds to do that? Since
We'll have
Greta
to.
does?
Great question. That's a great question. We have not evaluated that yet. I think there was some initial evaluation about whether the federal government would allow us on some of these, because a lot of the park and ride lots were funded with federal funds. So could we have them for other non-transit, non-people movement use? That's one consideration. And we're somewhere between a fourth and a third of our park and ride lots are leased properties from private owners. So we would only want to focus on the ones that are publicly owned.
Okay. Follow-up question, Mr. Chairman. How many park and rides do we own as a state, Greta park and rides?
I should know that off the top of my head, but I don't. I think it's somewhere in the 1920 realm, I think. But we will definitely be looking into that, because on the fringes, the location seems quite ideal. It's on the fringes of the metro areas, particularly Metro Atlanta, where we have the problem. That those deliveries that need to be made, and they've run out of their hours of service and start to hit traffic. So they're looking for a place to park. So we're definitely going to look into that. So also in the truck parking space, I want to be clear that in Georgia, and this is common in other states, 94% of truck parking is provided by the private sector. This is not a GDOT or state-only responsibility. But we are working to expand our public truck parking by 25%. Georgia DOT engineers are right now doing the design of where we can expand in our current footprint. Rest areas, either converting some car parking to trucks or just adding more asphalt for those trucks. So we're really, really focused on that as a priority for not just the safety of the public, but the safety of our truck drivers. In our business-focused freight analysis, we have looked at kind of the way business does capital planning. What are the foundational investments that we have to make to continue to run the business as is? What work do we need to do to grow the business and support strategic expansion? And then in the innovative space, what kind of R&D and kind of edgy new leading activities can we do in the transportation space? So one of the things we're most proud of is how much data we used for the plan that we have submitted to the federal government. There are literally 36 data sources that we have used. The typical ones that states and metropolitan planning organizations use, like Census, Department of Commerce, labor statistics, of course. Data that we collect at GDOT as well. But the part that's most exciting and interesting, compelling about this work is we have about a dozen data sources that are commercial data, that is populated by the private sector, whether they're shippers or carriers. They populate and put that data in, and they also use it for their own business planning purposes for capital and operating. These are data data sources such as Geotab and DAT, or Dial-A-Truck, ATRI, which is the American Trucking Association's research arm, RITIS, Peers, which is what is used by the Port Authority, Moody's, Info USA, which is used by the commercial real estate industry, and even some technology that's out there called Streetlight. This is advanced technology to capture data. We have gathered every bit of data we could to understand what's going on our freight network, but we've also looked very closely at what our companies need. Those are ones who own the cargo and ones who carry the cargo. Georgia companies like Coca-Cola, Home Depot, Chick-fil-A. We've talked, of course, with others who do business in Georgia, have a robust footprint here, such as Caterpillar, Walmart, and AT&T. UPS is of course a carrier, as is CSX and Norfolk Southern, who have advised us on our plan. Chick-fil-A has had some of the most interesting advisement for us about how to help move freight, but we've also worked with the Port Authority, the Georgia Motor Trucking Association, Georgia Power, you name it, the National Federation of Independent Businesses. We have reached out to as many businesses who are in the freight and logistics industry as we could to glean insights. And we've learned that there are 5 key factors that matter to businesses that are moving freight for their operations. Reliability, speed, and not overspeeding, but just velocity, speed to destination. Cost, risk, and safety/security. So in the reliability space, are they able to meet a delivery or pickup window when they promised that they could? And we have an infrastructure metric that proxies for that, which is the reduction of hours spent in non-recurring traffic. In speed, door-to-door travel time, we have a data point from those sources that indicates what is average speed for trucks along our state routes. Cost, of course, the goal is always to get cost out. In logistics, the lower logistics is and the cost of goods sold, the more profit goes to the bottom line for private companies. So we have congestion costs that we can analyze on our network and build that into project decision making. Risk, how to avoid when there might be a bridge washout, or maybe there's a backup on the interstate from a weather-related event. Are there other routes? Are there other modes? How can we help shift? Where shippers want to shift to rail, how can we help them? What is our role at Georgia DOT to improve rail access and to improve rail's capacity to serve customers? And of course, safety and security is number one. Yes, private companies care tremendously about their workforce, care tremendously about the general public, but the way that translates to their bottom line is in insurance costs. And insurance costs have gone up a lot lately for carriers. So where we can reduce crashes on our roadways helps their cost of doing business in Georgia go down.
Director, if it's okay, I've got, you're lighting up the board here, so I'm going to
Oh, sure.
allow a couple folks to ask their questions. Before I do that, though, I apologize for technical difficulties. We have emailed your presentation to everyone on the
Great.
committee so they can review it later. I'm going to start with Senator McLaurin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for presentation. So, my understanding correctly, this is selection criteria for GDOT projects across the state in general.
It will turn into that, yes.
Sure. Is there an economic analysis component that sort of does like a net GDP analysis at the end of that? Because, you know, assuming when you say cost, you're talking about private industry, their cost profile or whatever.
That's right.
But, you know, I'm assuming that you could have those five factors spit out a result that's favorable for one project, but you might, with an additional step, calculate that the economic impact of that is much lower than, let's say, another project where the metrics, those 5 metrics, are not quite as good. So I was wondering if you could speak to that overall economic analysis.
Yeah, that will occur. We use a tool called REMI, which is a common tool that gives us not just state GDP outcomes, but it also gives us things like personal income growth and changes to tax base, and even at the local level if we can get that granular with this statewide view. So we will do that analysis, definitely. What's tricky about it is on a project-by-project analysis, it doesn't give you the full picture of what the benefit is. The network effect, as we call it, is important. So we'll probably test various iterations based on various funding portfolios of which interact best together. The other thing you'll see in the PowerPoint is that because of that data, we've been able to disaggregate and understand which industries use which routes the most. So we have a line of sight into which state routes manufacturing relies on the most: food and agriculture and distribution. Every one of them require efficient movement in North Georgia. Think Atlanta north, every one of them. But in South Georgia, there's not a whole lot of distribution that goes anywhere except for the interstates. Not the case with manufacturing. Southeast routes are vital for manufacturing. That's not just because of the Port of Savannah, but it's because of the manufacturing that's occurring across the border in South Carolina. And then agriculture relies heavily on our state routes in Southwest Georgia. So we'll be able to not just look at the overall impact of the network effect and packages of projects, but which industries might benefit the most.
Last quick question, Mr. Chairman. Is there, now I'm not hearing you describe sort of the regional focus that might emerge based on this type of analysis. It was super interesting stuff, and you know, the number, the first number or digit of the grad school class, I'm sure is like a 9, right? It's well beyond my ability to understand this stuff, so bear with me. But is there an equity component? Like, let's assume, so North Georgia, for example, there are massive efficiency gains if you plan projects there. Is there some sort of equity challenge where, let's say, you know, South Georgia consumers are not getting as much access to freight, you know, because it makes more sense on a statewide basis to go to another region? Is there any part of the analysis that says, are we, you know, reducing costs for one area of the state, you know, kind of too much disproportionately to the rest of the state? Or I'm curious if that component is there at all.
Fascinating question, and it does go back to the equity, to the network effect answer. So if we improve capacity and access on I-75 north of Atlanta, that benefits agriculture more than you could possibly imagine, because they're not just, that cargo is not just staying in Southwest Georgia, it is heading up north. So we can take a look, and our models will tell us where that cargo originated or is destined for. That would be how we would estimate the value of a project that might be outside of that region where those shippers do business.
Okay, no, and like I said, this is already way beyond my pay grade, so I appreciate you indulging the questions. Thanks.
Another question, Senator Mello.
I just want to ask, with the Port of Savannah, probably the best investment the state ever made in purchasing the port from the federal government. In looking at the port operation, we've brought in the largest container ship, the CGM CMA Marco Polo. So my question is, has the port and GDOT worked out a way to partner with the shipping lines to ask them for investment? Because it would largely benefit them as a shipping line if we had this larger bridge, and to ask them to make a private investment into the project so that they would have a benefit from all of the shipping lines that use the Port of Savannah. Has there been any discussion to leverage some of that private investment to raise that bridge, to put that on the project list with GDOT to help offset some of the costs and expenditures? I'm not sure what we've done there.
It's a great question, and it's, to use the Senator McLaren's point, that's above my pay grade.
Okay.
But we do coordinate. Georgia DOT and Georgia Ports Authority coordinates very closely on the roadway improvements that are needed outside the gate there to improve access and to keep the economy strong there around the port.
Thank you, Senator. And Director Miller, just to pause here for a second, Senator Ginn would like to take a moment of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm going to tell you, Janine has done a lot of different things for our state of Georgia. Today, she's in charge of all our transportation planning, but in years past, I know she's the only person on the planet with no, we'll just say, back in, because she works it off all the time. So Janine, I want to ask you to stand up, and I want to present to you a little token of my appreciation. She did something that very seldom ever done in anywhere in the country, but here in Northeast Georgia, she actually tied 2 Class 1 railroads to an interstate, up there, and I've had this plaque for a little while, and I wanted to make sure that I gave it to you today in a way that was real complimentary of all the work that you do and the great things you do to improve transportation. I hate it that I took that much time, but I also know that you put in a hard day's work every day.
You're so kind. This is 7 years in the making.
It was a lot longer than that, but you know, thank you so much, Janine. I hate I got to run, but thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me that privilege.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Ginn. I've got a question. Is it from Senator Anna Vitarte or is it Senator Beach? Senator Beach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for all you do and all the hats you wear, and thank you for the presentation. Commissioner McMurray was in here the other day, and he gave a great presentation, but there was one slide that really hit me, and that was that Savannah's going to double in 10 years on its industrial warehouse space from 100 million to 200 million. And then you got the Hyundai facility.
Yes.
And I really am concerned about infrastructure in Savannah. And if we don't start working on it now and doing the engineering design and buy right away, in 10 years, we're going to have a problem down there. And that's, it's a great problem that we're growing down there, but we got to start figuring out a funding mechanism ASAP to start these projects, in my opinion, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not trying to put you on the spot and ask you for an answer, but I think we need to have a House Bill 170 type measure that is for freight and logistics. And I don't have all the answers, and that's why you're the chairman, but we've got to look at investing in the infrastructure around that port and all the way up through Georgia, you know, all over Georgia, really a freight and logistics. I mean, the number I think you've bantered around is $3.5 billion, you know, or more. And that's a lot of money, but the $45 million we're getting from the feds is not going to put a dent in that. So we've got to really look at how we're going to fund these projects. We can do the best plans in the world, but if we don't fund them and build them, it's going to sit on the shelf and collect dust, and I don't want that to happen. So we're going to have to make some tough decisions and make some innovative decisions and decide how we're going to fund this. I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I can give you 3 different kind of responses to there. So, yes, the commissioner's right, doubling of the capacity of warehouse space. But also, we found that 75% of the cargo that's coming off the ships lands in the 4 counties around the port there. So that's Chatham, Effingham, Bryan, and Bullock. 75% lands there initially. That's not mostly its final destination, but that's a lot of trucks and trains that are moving in that area. It is also true that the Port of Savannah grew 20%, you know, in 1 year. They've used up all their capacity that they had built for. We can't build roadway infrastructure that fast. So you're correct, it takes a lot longer to build the roadway infrastructure to support all of that cargo flow. And then also to clarify, the $45 million is simply what's specified for freight projects. We can't use that for anything but freight projects. But we have other federal funds that can be spent on freight projects. So that's the analysis we're going to take in this next step is whatever, as we do in the executive branch, we take the resources that we're given and we make the most effective decisions out of them for the taxpayer. So that's what we're going to do to understand how we can start to take bites out of this elephant that is freight flow. I also want to mention that I did not build the railroad. I just helped those who did build it. Yep.
We should already start thinking about buying right away, for example. I'll give you an example. If Savannah does double in growth, property values are going to go up. Properties are going to become more expensive. I've got a project in my district right now that the right-of-way is more than the construction cost because the property values in North Fulton and South Forsyth have just done this. So we've got to start planning now to build for later so that we're not in a predicament in 10 years when all this happens. Just my comments.
Thank you, Chairman Beach. If I can maybe summarize what I'm hearing you say in our previous conversations, you essentially are building out the business case and the metrics by which you're going to put together a proposed project list as well. Once we have that project list, it's then our decision and job to figure out what Chairman Beach is talking about, how do we pay for it? My question would be is, what's the timeline on that, do you think, as to when you guys will have recommended project lists and something that we can see that's in more of a final product?
I don't have a timeline on that yet.
Okay.
We can understand from the modeling what would work. Then there's the practicality analysis of what is in what readiness state, like what projects are already in our pipeline. We do know that there are some that are already in there. Can we advance them from out years to earlier years? How much do we have to go through federal permitting to get some of those done? So there's, in addition to just what it would do if we waved a magic wand, there's the practicalities that we need to build into that those project evaluations as well.
Great, thank you.
So that's what builds in time to understand that. Just a couple other points then. what we're seeing today in those three key industries, that's 60% of the cargo that's moving is those three industries: manufacturing, agriculture, and distribution. Today, distribution is third in the total tonnage that's moving through the state. First is manufacturing. It's more than 200 million tons a year in manufacturing cargo. And agriculture is second today. But by 2050, distribution, which is right now about 1/4 of the volumes of agriculture, is going to surmount the volumes of agriculture moving through our state. Distribution is growing like a weed, growing exponentially. You think about how much agriculture, how much production we do in the state of Georgia as our main industry. That flow of distribution is going to surmount that. Is incredible to think about. So like I said, our last steps, we're going to take a look at what projects are already in our pipeline. If we have the opportunity to redirect any of our other funds that are state and federal funds to freight projects that would have higher priority, have higher bang for the buck that we have identified, go through the viability, feasibility analysis, and then apply for federal grants. One of the new things about the infrastructure law that was passed about 1.5 years ago is how many more what are called discretionary grants we can apply for and draw down those dollars. So once the federal government approves our federal freight plan, we'll be in great shape to apply for some of those.
Great. Thank you, Director Miller. Any other questions for the director? Senator Moore. Chairman Moore.
Hey, thank you. You spent the first part of your presentation talking about this $45 million. Was that a grant in itself, or was that just a general allocation from the feds?
Great question. It's part of the formula funds. So
Okay.
every state, there's a formula that is specified in law that Federal Highways gives each state based on that formula. A carve out of that formula is the NHFP for $45 million to Georgia. So we get it every year. As long as we've got the federal plan on record, as long as they approve it, we can use those dollars.
Okay, and then you mentioned more federal dollars, $427 million. What was that?
That's the total amount over the 8-year period that they ask us to budget for. So our freight plan that we submitted to Federal Highways has to have the 8-year look. So
Okay.
it's $427 million over that 8-year period. It's basically 45 million times 8.
So how much is the federal government helping us out as a state when it comes to your work?
In terms of the federal dollars that we receive overall, and not all of them go to capacity projects. There's a lot of dollars that are going to maintenance and operations, and so in total, I think we're about 1.7 or 1.8 billion a year
Okay.
from the federal government. And there's a lot of strings that come with those dollars as well. They're not, very few of them are quick or easy to spend.
So in previous presentations, we've talked about the Port of Savannah, the ultimate solution being the tunnel, right? And then we could always bring in as big of ships, as the world ever creates. Do you ever anticipate the federal government ever allocating funds to that, or do you think that'll be the state's responsibility to have that tunnel built?
Because we will have to go through a federal process for whatever we do for the Savannah River crossing, when going through a federal process, we will always go after federal money. That's just kind of the way of doing business in state transportation. If there's a federal process, we go after federal money. How much might be available and under what terms, we don't know.
Okay.
And the reasons for that, I think for members who are new, myself included, this is new to me. The federal process means you're following the federal process. Whereas if there is no federal process and you use state funding for it, you don't lock yourself into those strings that are attached, and you can typically get these projects done quicker. If it's a state project, you use state funding for, which is why you guys try to use federal funding for the federal project, state funding for the state projects. Is that
Yes,
accurate?
Generally speaking.
Great.
When we would, anything that where it's crossing the Savannah River, that would have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers involved. So even if it was totally state funded, we have a federal process there. But generally speaking, yes, that's, we still follow, I want to be clear, we still follow an environmental process. And it's very similar to the federal process, actually, in terms of the outcomes. There's really no difference. We're just able to do it faster without having to interact with a multitude of federal bureaucracies, federal agencies.
Great. Well, I think this is, I mentioned this to the committee at the start of the meeting, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. I think it's a multi-year arc for those of us that will be here for multiple years. And thank you for initiating the dialogue. Again, sorry for the technical difficulties. I'm sure there's
My
also going to be a
apologies.
line for you at the end of this meeting for those of us that have projects in our district we'd like to get added to the STIP.
I'll get my notebook
So
out.
with that in mind, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.